Well, here we are again. Happy Wednesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We are demonstrating the conflation between Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, and Matthew chapter 22, and under the umbrella of the subject of the vindication of the martyrs. My argument goes like this. It's actually twofold here. Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following is drawn from, based on, the Old Testament prophecies of Joel 2, Joel 2 through 3, Isaiah 2 through 4, which predicted the last days, the day of the Lord, the vindication of the martyrs. Now, since Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following is drawn from both of those Old Testament prophecies and anticipated the fulfillment of both of those prophecies, then that means that since Joel 2 and 3, Isaiah 2 through 4 predicted the vindication of the martyrs, that means that Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, even though it does not mention the vindication of the martyrs, is nonetheless dealing with that subject. Now, I'm going to spend some time as we try to finish this out in sharing with you Isaiah 2 through 4, Luke 23, Matthew, the Olivet Discourse, Thessalonians, and the book of Revelation. Long time ago, so maybe a couple of years ago now, I shared this with you. The response was excellent, so I need to share that again to refresh our memories, to bring it back to our memories so that we don't lose it, because it's absolutely, stunningly important. In the meantime, back to Matthew chapter 22. In Matthew chapter 22, what do we have? Well, we have the story of a king who made a great wedding banquet for his son. He called out his servants to call those who had already been invited. Remember what we said yesterday, please. Those servants, when they were sent to call those who had been invited, and that was Old Covenant Israel, okay? Beat those servants. He sent more. They beat them, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was angry, and he sent out his armies, and he killed those wicked men and burnt their city. Now, I like what Donald Hagner in the Word Biblical Commentary says, commenting on Matthew chapter 22, verse 7. It is impossible to read this and not think about AD 70. Well, amen. I mean, it corresponds perfectly. Jesus said, Luke chapter 11, 49 and 50, behold, I send prophets, wise men, and scribes to you, and you shall kill, you shall crucify, you shall chase from city to city. Luke 13, 28 and following says almost the same thing. Is there any question whatsoever about who the servants were sent to call Israel to the wedding? Now, like I said, folks, it's important to realize that invitation was going to the diaspora, the 10 tribes, as well as Judah and Benjamin. Because the wedding was not going to be of just the 2 tribes or of just the 10 tribes. According to Jeremiah chapter 3, it was to be, quote, the whole house of Israel. According to Ezekiel chapter 37, 25 and following, it would be the whole house of Israel. The 2 sticks of Israel coming back together to join together one nation so that the nations might glorify God. Restoration of Israel, restoration of the 12 tribes, resulting in the glorification of Yahweh by the nations. That's a constant theme throughout the Tanakh. So, we have here an absolute definitive parable about the vindication of the martyrs. Question: does the term vindication of the martyrs appear in Matthew chapter 22? No, it does not. Oh, by the way, does the word temple appear in Matthew chapter 22, verses 1 to 11? No, it does not. Does all the righteous blood of all the righteous, all the way back to Abel, appear in Matthew 22? No. Is that what it's about? Yes. By the way, Matthew chapter 22 doesn't mention the coming of the Lord. Does that mean it's different from Matthew chapter 21? You know, I have mentioned how my friend Steve Gregg has written a book, Why Not Full Preterism. Throughout the entirety of the book, he argues upon what is known as a negative fallacy. I call it the missing word, different word hermeneutic. Because throughout the entirety of the book, and by the way, in this book that I'm currently trying desperately to get finished on Sukkot and resurrection, I document 5 glaring examples, but I want to tell you, I could document 20 or 25 examples. But over and over, Steve Gregg, in his book, Why Not Full Preterism, argues and says, well, you know, in Romans chapter 8, where Paul talks about the redemption of creation, he doesn't mention the destruction of the old creation, like Peter does. Therefore, he may very well have something different in mind. And it's certainly true that Isaiah spoke of a coming new heaven and new earth, but he does not use the term destruction of the old cosmos, or he doesn't mention that. Therefore, he may not have in mind what Peter did. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, I've said this so many different times. This is a horrible, illegitimate, specious, and false hermeneutic. In Matthew 22, you have the master, you have a vineyard, you have servants sent, servants persecuted, killing of the son, destruction of the persecutors. Matthew chapter 22, the time of the wedding for the son, the sending of the servants, the persecution of the servants. Oh, wait, it doesn't mention the killing of the son. Therefore, it must be something totally different, right? No, that's not right. That would be a silly argument. But you know what? If we took Steve Gregg's hermeneutic, if we took the hermeneutic of some of the folks that have tried to respond to me on YouTube and said, well, I don't see the word temple in Matthew chapter 25. I don't see the word temple in the book of Hebrews. Therefore, it can't be talking about the temple. Okay. So, you don't see the term coming of the Lord in Matthew 25. You don't see the word temple in Matthew 22. Matthew 22, not 25. Yeah, those words are not there. But it's a completely illegitimate hermeneutic to say, well, okay, you have the coming of the Lord and judgment of the persecutors in Matthew 21. You don't have the coming of the Lord, although you do have the judgment of the persecutors. But since you don't have the coming of the Lord, they must be different. No, they don't have to be different. As I said, that's an illegitimate argumentum ad desperatum, and we need to be better students of the word than to try to employ that kind of specious hermeneutic. Now then, back to Matthew 22. Do you suppose that judgment of those persecutors was a vindication of the servants that had been sent to them to gather them to the wedding? It was not. Why not? I want to tell you what, folks, if you do not understand the relationship between the punishment of persecutors and the vindication of the persecuted, then you don't understand the Hebraic mind at all. You don't understand the Hebraic way of thinking at all. This is judgment. And by the way, it is lex talionis. Lex talionis was the Latin term, obviously, used in the first century world, Roman world, Jewish world, that someone does something wrong to you and they get repaid in kind for mistreating you. It's eye for eye, tooth for tooth. It is justice, and it is vindication. And men such as N.T. Wright recognize this. If you have ever read his book, Jesus and the Victory of God, you know that throughout his entire book that thick, in pericope after pericope, parable after parable, N.T. Wright focuses on this is a story about the vindication of the suffering of Christ, about the suffering of his servants coming in the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. Oh, and then guess what he does? This is a sidebar. He comes to Romans chapter 8, and he talks about the coming, manifestation of the sons of God, the coming redemption of creation, and he completely divorces it from the context of the fact that Paul is talking to people who are to glorify God because they were fellow partakers of the sufferings of Christ, who was going to vindicate them at the about to be revelation of the glory of Christ. Same context. You see, there's some of the servants of Matthew 21 and Matthew 22 who were proclaiming the imminent coming of the wedding of the Son. They had been betrothed after all. That's what Paul said, 2 Corinthians 11, verse 2. I am jealous over you with a godly jealousy, having betrothed you as a chaste virgin unto Christ. Hello? The betrothal has taken place. It's time for the wedding. All things are ready. Come to the feast. But do you know what some commentators do? They go to Matthew chapter 22 and they say, well, yeah, verse 7 is without any doubt whatsoever. That's AD 70. But wait, the king sent out his servants into the highways and into the byways and said, bring them in so that my banquet might be full. And a man came in and he wasn't dressed in the wedding garments. And the master of the wedding said, sir, why are you dressed like you are? And the man said, I didn't have any garments. And so he was cast into outer darkness. And so what commentators do, I've had people tell me this just recently on YouTube or Facebook. What do? They insert a 2,000-year gap between AD 70 and this supposed end of time judgment of this one man, who didn't have proper wedding garments. You know, folks, it didn't take 2,000 years for the servants to go out in the highways and byways and call in anyone and everyone who would wish to come. That is what you call a serious and gross violation of the text. That is eisegesis at its worst. But I hope you can see that Matthew chapter 22, just like Matthew chapter 21, is about the vindication of the martyrs. And once again, I developed this extensively in my book. I have a tough time getting used to that. We shall meet him in the air, the wedding of the King of Kings. I go down passage after passage after passage in the New Testament. I won't be able to list them all as we try to wrap this up. But I give an exegesis of each of the New Testament texts that is dealing with the vindication of the martyrs. So go to my bookstore, donkpreston.com, order the book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, the Wedding of the King of Kings, or order Sam Dawson's book, Revelation Realized, Vindication of the Martyrs from Genesis to Revelation. order either one or both of the books, you'll be glad you did. In the meantime, on the flip side, we're going to Matthew 23. So I'll meet you there.